pleased you're here. Perhaps you could give me a hand. I've been trying to teach my grade 6 students about the scientific method. I want them to design experiments to examine the particle theory by dissolving various substances at varying temperatures. But they don't seem to get it, and I don't understand why. I think I need a better general understanding of learning theories to help me improve my instructional practices. What do I need to learn?
Behaviorism examines tangible and measurable human behaviors that result from a stimulus. Behaviorism views the learner as passive and mutable with the appropriate stimuli. Much as its title suggests, behaviorism is concerned with managing and molding behavior to prime students for learning rather than an understanding of knowledge production. Teachers must remember that a well-behaved student is not necessarily ready to learn, and a disruptive student is not necessarily opposed to learning. Let's examine developmental and constructivist approaches to learning. We will examine the work of Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. These theories each view learning and the production of knowledge as an active and contextualized process mediated by people, places, and objects. Piaget's scientific legacy is his constructivist theory of knowledge. However, he's most often cited in connection with his cognitive theory of development. Piaget uses the word schema to explain the way humans understand and construct knowledge. Schemas are the simple blocks for how we organize our knowledge in our minds. As we experience the world, we are always seeking cognitive equilibrium, which is the continuity between what we see in our environments with what we create in our minds or thought process. By actively interacting with the world around us, humans can either add new information to their schemas through assimilation or change their understanding of a concept through accommodation. Piaget believes that children and adults actively create their own knowledge. Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development that all children experience, resulting in maturation, are the sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational stages. Prior to Piaget, children were largely thought to be passive with limited ability for complex thoughts. Because they're new to the world and unable to communicate, infants were seen as tabula rasa that would simply accumulate experiences. Lev Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist, also put forward a constructivist theory of knowledge. However, the social context and cultural position of the learner plays a far more significant role in his work. To this end, Vygotsky is a social constructivist. Vygotsky is responsible for the development of the social development theory of learning, which emphasizes the importance of interaction on a socio-cultural level. For Vygotsky, interaction with other people, particularly adults, greatly impacted the learning of students. Vygotsky identified the zone of proximal development as a cognitive space within which learners will make greater gains with the assistance of a more skilled collaborator.
I see now that the views I hold about learners, learning, and the production of knowledge add up to my own philosophy of teaching. The more I know about how learners learn, the better I might be at helping them to learn. Given that my attempts to explain the scientific methods to students hasn't led to the understanding of the process that I want them to have, I think I need to enlist some constructivist strategies so that they can investigate this process for themselves. How will I apply this to my professional toolbox? What are the pedagogical implications, the big ideas I can take away from the study of learning theories?
Great question. Educational theory has several implications for instruction. There are 4 major considerations that advancements in theory have exposed. There is now ample evidence that supports the idea that infants are not blank slates and in fact are capable of understanding mathematical and scientific principles at a very early age. Alison Gopnik's TED Talk illustrates some of the ways that psychologists study how babies learn and what they already know. Infants know, learn, and are able to communicate a significant understanding of physical and biological causality, number, and language. From a teaching perspective, it is essential to recognize that children begin school with a wealth of mathematical and scientific knowledge and experience and have been predisposed to learning since birth.
What is going on in this baby's mind? If you'd asked people this 30 years ago, Most people, including psychologists, would have said that this baby was irrational, illogical, egocentric, that he couldn't take the perspective of another person or understand cause and effect. In the last 20 years, developmental science has completely overturned that picture. So in some ways, we think that this baby's thinking is like the thinking of the most brilliant scientists.
Although children are predisposed for learning, there is often an assumption that metacognitive and strategic learning are not appropriate for young children. In fact, children are very capable of using a variety of strategies and demonstrating metacognitive knowledge when learning new concepts. When students develop a variety of strategies, they are able to solve problems by explaining their thinking, working together, challenging each other's ideas, using new vocabulary, and reflecting on their work. It is important to recognize that all humans hold an understanding of what it means to be intelligent, which has implications for learning. According to Bransford, Brown, and Cocking, children who hold entity theories view intelligence as a fixed property and often avoid any kind of assessment or feedback. However, children who are incremental theorists often develop their own learning goals and strongly believe that intelligence is a result of your own motivation. Understanding how students view themselves will help teachers guide student learning more effectively. Teachers and parents can scaffold tasks, increase interest, motivate, model, and provide feedback to improve student motivation. Major learning theories claim that children learn through interactions with their environment and the adults in them. However, interactions between children and adults vary greatly, as is shown by various ethnographical studies. In some cultures, children are not actively engaged in adult activities, but learn through observation and listening. In other cultures, adults directly teach children specific lessons in an apprenticeship-type role. Educators need to know their students and may need to restructure science and math curriculum to incorporate non-dominant worldviews by creating learning situations that better reflect the lived experience of multiple cultures.
So, by expecting my students to think about their thinking, I can help them to develop metacognitive strategies that will help them learn in any subject area. As I encourage and foster the use of diverse learning strategies, I can help my students to create and achieve their own learning goals. This might help to instill a growth mindset along the way. Certainly, I'll also have to be cognizant that different cultures might approach learning from varying perspectives. Do these same considerations apply to math and science? Is there anything different or specific that I should consider when teaching science and math? Learning theories are relevant to all teaching. There are 3 principles that researchers have identified as important for teaching children and adults. These 3 principles improve learning in any subject. The first principle is that all learners enter learning situations with pre-existing knowledge on the subject area. Effective teaching elicits from students their pre-existing understanding of the subject matter to be taught and provides opportunities to build on or challenge the initial understanding. In math, certain preconceptions can interfere with learning as it can detrimentally cause students to believe they are incapable of math and thus try to avoid it. These 3 preconceptions are: 1. That math is about learning to compute. 2. That math is about following rules to get guaranteed answers. And 3. That some people can do math and some cannot. To avoid the negative consequences of these preconceptions, teachers can show students that rules are made by humans, but that their own strategies can also be acceptable. It is also useful to encourage discussion and math talk so that students can clarify their own strategies and see the advantages of other strategies. Finally, they can also design instruction to help connect commonly held knowledge to the required math understandings. Similarly, in science, teachers must provide students with numerous opportunities to make and test knowledge claims and to examine the adequacy of their own and others' reasoning in doing so. Their preconceptions may cause them not to see certain findings or to quickly dismiss them if adequate investigation is not completed. The second principle is that all learning requires conceptual organization and factual understanding. Without an existing knowledge of scientific or mathematical procedures, students are unable to solve problems and learn new knowledge. It is important that teachers help students build and consolidate prerequisite competencies, understand new concepts in depth, and organize both concepts and competencies in a network of knowledge. The third principle is that instruction that supports metacognition will enable students to monitor their own learning. Students who are able to explain their thinking about how to solve a problem have a much deeper understanding of the problem at hand. Having students explain their own thinking can also offer the teacher insight into the students' thoughts, thus providing information on misunderstandings and what should be taught next. Now that makes a lot of sense. I need to determine the prior knowledge students bring with them to the science classroom. Students design and test their own experiments whenever they do something just to see what will happen. I imagine my students have made Kool-Aid or hot chocolate at one time or another, so I need to guide them to revisit those experiences and help them to figure out how those events pertain to our inquiry. I need to harness those previous experiences and help them to build a framework for the system I'd like them to understand. In building our framework, I'll help them to think about their thinking. To be honest, I'm still confused about a few ideas. I'd like to teach this way, but I didn't think children were capable of metacognition, nor of deep knowledge building in a subject area. And what about when learning theories just don't seem to hold true? What is happening then?
Unfortunately, many science educators have greatly oversimplified and misinterpreted Piagetian theory. During an educational conference in 1964, Piaget challenged educators who used his theories to justify a more structured approach to education. He stated, "The goal of education is not to increase the amount of knowledge, but to create the possibilities for a child to invent and discover for himself." To teach the way Piaget intended, educators need to create environments that encourage students to actively explore and create. In fact, children and adults alike that are novices in a subject are confined to concrete thinking founded in surface features. Specifically in science, children and adults frequently mix theory and practice. For example, Charles Darwin himself had some difficulty distinguishing between his theory of natural selection and evidence. On his trip to the Galapagos Islands, despite recording pages of evidence, Darwin initially focused on only 2 species with little variation, rather than the finches that were extremely varied.
This has been helpful. I see that theory must be embedded into practice purposefully and artfully. I need to provide high expectations for their achievement while also considering some of the ages and stages that manifest in a classroom. My students need to build their own experiments, develop their own conclusions, and most importantly, explain and defend their own conclusions. Thanks for discussing these ideas with me. I wonder, where will things go from here? Will new learning theories continue to be created? New learning theories build upon traditional behaviorist, cognitive constructivist, and humanist theories of learning, especially in response to the technology which surrounds our day-to-day lives and which is being used increasingly in the classroom. Learning theories are being adapted, revised, and modified to accommodate the impact of technology on learning. One such example is called connectivism, as envisioned by Canadians Stephen Downes and George Siemens. This learning theory situates knowledge in the connections between nodes of a personal learning network, with the learner at the center and the connected nodes as people, computers, or other cultural artifacts. Learning, thus, takes place when learners make connections between ideas located throughout their personal learning networks. But all is not steeped in technology. As noted earlier, a learner's perception of their intelligence can directly affect their achievement. Carol Dweck's work surrounding academic motivation and metacognition shows us that when students hold a growth mindset and believe in their ability to learn, they are more likely to be willing to make mistakes, to attempt more challenging tasks, and to accept that learning can take time. Conversely, when a student holds a fixed mindset, they are less able to forge onward on their learning journey, instead labeling themselves failures or incapable of solving a problem. In a recent TED Talk, Dr. Dweck sought to impart the power of the word yet. A growth mindset will identify challenges as outcomes that can't be met yet. A fixed mindset sees only a challenge that can't be met. By wisely praising elements of the process of learning and not the product or the student, teachers help students to identify how their effort, their focus, their choice of strategies, and their tenacity are helping them to learn. Fortunately, it has been shown that a fixed mindset can be transformed to a growth mindset, pointing to the idea that skills and abilities in math and science can be improved and can show growth over time. Effective learning theories should give rise to effective instructional theories. In math and science, constructivist and social constructivist theories can support a teacher's effort to create relevant and appropriate learning opportunities for students. By taking stock of a student's prior knowledge, by helping students to develop schema incorporating conceptual knowledge, and by scaffolding metacognitive strategies to assist students to evaluate their own learning, an educator can set her students up for success.